Alright y'all, you want to increase your jumping ability or explosive leg strength, but Rona is keeping your gym closed? Well look, I'm Eric Cromwell bringing you a jumping plyometric workout, the Rona home version, using just a couple of bands. Alright, vibe with me now, let's go! Okay, before any workout, we gotta warm up, get that blood flowing, get our bodies going. The first movement is gonna be the A skip. This is a common movement many of us have seen, but place the emphasis on the wrong aspects, so let's look at it. We want a good knee drive, at least parallel to the ground. If you can go higher, get it. Next, we want that dorsiflexion in our driving ankle, which means the bottom of the foot close to parallel to the ground and not pointed down. Lastly, we want to land on the ball of our foot, not the toes, not the heels. Keep the focus on striking the ground hard, not on the high knee drive. Do this for about 20 ground strikes and you're going to be good. Rest for about 20 to 30 seconds, shake it out, and next we got the triple pistons. Again, we want to drive those knees to at least 90 degrees. Now for the starting position, you'll want an upright posture and keep the heel of your rear leg down for balance. We're going to hit 3 quick strikes, then hold briefly. 3 quick strikes, hold. Notice here we are landing more on our toes like we would in a normal sprint. Do this for 10 hits of 3 strikes and then rest for about 45 seconds and move on to the next. Next, let's get some core activation with a side plank dip and overhead reach. Jumping high and being explosive requires more than just explosive legs. We need a tight, strong core for stability. Here, the upward movement at waist level will work our obliques and our core. The overhead reach gives us a good stretch of those opposing obliques and our lats. We're going to want to perform about 5 to 7 of these before we rest and switch over to the other side. Now when you're doing these, be smarter than I was and make sure to move your mat far away from any obstructions. It's okay though, I figured it out. Reach over the couch. Notice also that this movement requires me to press my lower leg into the ground, working on that hip abduction, which further improves stability. Okay, we got our blood and body going a little bit. Now let's work on that mobility and flexibility. We're gonna take a few deep breaths as we open up our lungs and shake out our arms a little bit before we get into a short stretch sequence. We want to take a pretty deep step back because in a moment we will perform a deep front stretch for those hip flexors and overall hip girdle. Go ahead and lower the knee to the ground. Place both hands inside of the knee. Make sure you have your balance and feel a good stretch on that rear hip flexor. Here we rotate our waist in and raise our inner arm up. We'll hold this very briefly, maybe about a second or so. Rotate back to center and place your hand back on the ground. Continue the waist rotation outward as you raise the other hand up. Wrists, elbows, head, and shoulders should be aligned with the eyes always following the movement. Return the hand back to the ground and prep to rise for a deep sumo stretch. Continue into a growing stretch with an outward hip rotation. Return to the middle, then repeat the same to the other side. Rotating on the heel will open up the hips, giving us greater mobility during our explosive movements. Always return back to the center and continue the stretch as normal. From a front view, you can see my feet are much wider than shoulder width apart. We can start like this, then rotate to either side so both feet point in the same direction. Remember, we lower that rear knee to the ground as we place both hands on the ground as well. We want our focus on that rear hip flexor stretch. Remember, both hands are inside of the forward knee. Now here you can see the timing of the stretch. Remember, we don't really stay there for too long. Always return to the middle briefly before we move on to the next side. Again, we're not trying to have any sort of growing tears or hamstring tears or pulls, and we want that hip mobility. We don't want any sort of hip clunkiness happening. So here we have that outward hip rotation. Remember, returning to the middle briefly prior to getting up or moving to the other side helps prevent injuries by decreasing the load on both sides. Remember, we're all about efficiency here, and we can't be efficient if we're injured. Okay, shake it out and reach for the stars. This will be our starting position for the next mobility sequence. Feet shoulder width apart, back straight, heads up, arms up, and stretch. We're going to bend at the waist and we're going to crawl out to a push-up position. Now if you need to, feel free to bend your knees a little bit here. And we're not going to camp out in the push-up position at all. We're going to go straight into a cobra stretch. We want to keep our head and eyes up so we get a nice abdominal stretch here. From there, you want to tiptoe in slightly into a pike position. We want to keep our back straight. Here it looks like mine is bent a little bit, but I'm wearing a back brace. Try to keep the heels close down to the ground and the legs straight. This will give a nice stretch of the hamstring and the calves. We walk it in a little bit and go down into the baby pose. Here you should be able to see that your hip flexors are loosened from the previous stretches. Also in this one, we want to stretch that lower back as well as our lats. We're going to crawl out with our hands to either side. First we're going to go over to the left or right, then we're going to come back to the center as always, and then go back over to the other side, left or right. Let's take a look at that whole sequence from the front. We got the crawl out straight into the cobra. And remember, we don't camp out in any of these positions long. We go straight into the pike, crawl it in a little bit, add a little pressure backward so that we can stretch out those calves and hamstrings, bring it down to the ground, move into our baby pose. I'm gonna crawl it out to the side, not stay here long at all, and go back to the middle. Bring it to the other side, not stay here long either, and then we bring it back to the middle. Alright, finally we're on to our last stretch. Some people call this a 90-90, some will call this a variation to the inverted hurdler stretch. It doesn't matter what you want to call this, regardless, we're going to go through 2 iterations of this on both sides. We want to lean forward directly over our leg. We let one arm ride underneath the other arm. This gives us a greater stretch to our lower back. You could rotate the hand over and try to crawl out a little bit further to enhance the stretch if you need to. And remember, we always come back to the center before we switch to any side. Now from this angle, you might be able to see it a little bit better. Both legs bent to at least 90-degree angles. You can see my rear leg is bent closer to a 45-degree angle, but that front leg is still right about 90, a little bit less. Alright, now here we're going to look at it from the front. You see that front knee is right at 90 degrees. When we lean forward, we want to lean right over that front knee. Remember to keep your head up. We don't want to tuck our chin, and we want to try to focus on pushing forward rather than down. Pass one arm underneath the other arm, making sure we twist at the waist, and we want to try to get our shoulder right to the outside of that knee. Also, we're not turning this into a static stretch. We want to maintain some sort of movement, albeit small movement. Again, we return to the middle before switching sides. We want to align ourselves directly over that knee. Move one arm underneath the other arm and go for that full stretch. Come back to the center again. Alright, now into the exercises. Now this first one is a split squat into a high jump and a high knee tuck. We'll do 3 sets of 3 quick jumps with 1 minute rest in between. Let's take a look at it. We keep our back straight and we make sure our knee does not go past our toe on our front leg. When we explode up, our hands move in a normal stride motion as well as our legs, and we want to go for a high knee tuck. Continue another stride on the way down so we end essentially in the same position we began. From a front view, my leg on the right side of your screen is up front. From there, we'll load up and explode up, taking a full stride on the jump up and taking another one for the way down. If there's too much inward or outward canting of the knees, then we could try this version. Here is a mix between the two in that we still only take 1 stride, but we also maintain focus on the high knee tuck, keeping in mind that when we land, we don't let that rear knee hit the ground and we don't let that forward knee move past our toes. Remember, for that first exercise, you're only doing one of those variations. Exercise number 2, we're going to call this a single leg kickback to a high jump. We'll perform 2 sets of 3 jumps for each leg. Don't beat yourself up if you already can't get too high off the ground. Your legs should be pretty fatigued after that last exercise. Alright, exercise 3, the kneeling hop to the high jump with a high knee tuck. You begin kneeling with your toes bent, sitting on your heels. Explode up to your feet, jump as high as you can and tuck your knees. Perform 4 to 6 of these jumps with 45 seconds rest in between. Now we can't jump high without good stabilization, so these banded crab walks are going to help us out with that. We're going to perform 3 sets of 20 steps in whichever way you can get those steps in. You see, I could only take about 4 or 5 steps in either direction. If all we could do is take 1 step in any direction, then we're taking that 1 step 20 times. Next up is the banded good mornings. Now we don't need the extra band on the lower legs. All we need is the band up on the waist. You want to step out so there's no slack in the band and you have enough tension. Keep your back straight, bend at your hips, and keep a slight bend in your knees. You'll want to push through with your hips, not your legs. We'll perform 4 sets of 6 to 8 reps on this exercise with about 45 seconds to 1 minute rest in between sets. Next up, we have the single leg version of the same exercise. We're going to perform this only 2 sets of about 3 or 4. Same rules apply. We want to keep our back straight with a slight bend in our knee. Think of our heel as a stake in the ground, driving the force all the way through up to our hips. Keep the first half of this movement as smooth and as controlled as you can, and you want to try to explode forward. Each of these exercises are more functionally efficient exercises for the hamstrings. I know you didn't think that we warmed up our core for nothing. We're going straight into 2 sets of 3 to 5 on each side. You rest for 45 seconds after 1 round of doing both sides. Okay, you see what it is. We got the band up at the waist. We're stepping out, increasing the tension as we go. The key here is we want to keep our back straight. We want to keep our core stable. Okay, now onto the single leg bridge. With this exercise, we want to do 2 sets of maximum reps with the rest of 1 minute in between each set. For this exercise, we don't focus on the straight leg. We stabilize ourselves with our hands spread out, keeping the weight on our shoulders and our heel. We drive down with our heel and bring our hips as high away from the ground as we can, with our lower back and butt never touching the ground. Here we can see the straight leg is just for added weight, but the focus should be on the heel drive into the ground. If the straight leg version is too hard, here's another version where we bend the knee. Because we could drive the other knee up higher and giving us more force, a good goal on this one is to get that other thigh parallel to the ground. The same rules still apply here. On the down portion of this exercise, the butt and the lower back do not hit the ground. And although this is an easier version, we still do as many reps as we can. Y'all know what it is, maximum effort. Remember, you want to drive through with the heel. Okay, that's my time. I hope you all like what you saw, had some fun. Don't send me any hate mail in a few days because you're sore. Instead, hit me up with your pics and your vids showing me your improvements and your gains.